The moment Ava Sinclair unlocked her phone on Saturday morning, the first notification wasn't a work email, but a text from her mother with only 2 lines. "If you don't show up, I'll book a flight over. Tonight, I'll personally bring him to your house." It wasn't the first time she'd been threatened like that. But this time, Ava knew her mother meant it. That feeling, the helpless, exhausting sensation of being emotionally cornered by the very woman who gave her life, rose up again, even though she was 29, living alone on the West Coast, fully financially independent for years. 2 years after a breakup that shattered her trust, Ava thought her mother would finally stop bringing up love. But Lorraine, the woman who lived 2 states away, widowed since Ava was just 17, gentle yet stubborn in a way no one could resist, still believed that a good man was the cure to keep her daughter from becoming too unbreakable. Ava closed her eyes and rubbed her forehead. She knew this script by heart. Lorraine would casually invite her for a weekend at a lakeside resort, and behind all the sweet concern was always some disguised matchmaking scheme. She had planned to refuse from the start, but her mother was never one to lose. And when Lorraine added, "I already told their family you'd be there. Don't embarrass me," Ava felt her chest tighten. No matter how grown a woman becomes, there are still moments she reverts into a well-behaved child, for one person only. In the end, she replied with just one word, "Fine." That afternoon, Ava stood in front of the resort mirror and swore she had never left the house with less effort put into her appearance. A faded, smoky linen shirt from probably the 64th wash, old jeans, hair tied back with a $3 grocery store elastic, no lipstick, no mascara, no attempt to impress. Because what was the goal? Simple. Show up, make her mother happy, end this as fast as possible, leave before it gets dark. Lorraine had told her to just drop by the cafe in the main lobby, only 20 minutes, using the exact tone one would use when trying to pretend this was absolutely not a blind date. Ava stepped out of her room, walked through a hallway faintly scented with cedarwood, and got into the elevator to the ground floor. The autumn sky was dim, the lake outside fractured into silver-gray light through the glass. This resort was truly beautiful, if only it wasn't tied to the feeling of being emotionally cornered to the point of a headache. She headed straight to Maple and Stone, a small cafe paneled in dark wood, warm amber lighting, right by the lobby entrance. The scent of freshly pulled espresso mixed with vanilla and butter cookies lingered in the air. Most of the tables were occupied by couples on a weekend getaway. Ava could practically hear her mother in her head. "See, perfectly pleasant. No one's forcing you to sign a marriage contract." She expected nothing more than the usual template man. Decent, stable, serious about the future, which always translated into empty conversations about job titles, mortgage strategies, or a golden retriever named Bailey. But Ava stopped the moment she saw the man sitting by the window. No suit, no tucked-in dress shirt, no gold watch, not even a tie, just a charcoal crewneck sweater, sleeves casually pushed up, revealing a wrist with the faint sun-warmed tone of someone who spent real time outdoors. The kind of man who could walk into any room, boardroom or casual, without ever having to try. His head was slightly lowered, eyes on a book, not a phone. A rare kind of calm in a resort designed for display, which was exactly why her guard shot up. Not her mother's type, not the my church friend's responsible son category. So then, who? Ava halted just a few steps away. The man looked up, effortlessly, as if he knew someone was watching. Not in the way people size up a blind date, just a quiet gaze, like a soft beam of light, steady, unhurried, enough to unsettle Ava, despite how rarely she ever lost composure. For the first time in months, she couldn't predict what would happen next. And in that exact second, she knew tonight would not be something she could just get over with. In fact, she wasn't even sure she'd be able to leave on schedule anymore. Ava hadn't even processed why she'd been standing still that long when he rose to his feet. He walked toward her with an unhurried confidence, the kind of ease that suggested he had nothing to prove, nothing to ask permission for. Nothing like any man her mother had ever introduced, and definitely not the kind who'd show up to a blind date with a stranger. "Excuse me, I'm guessing. You're Ava?" he said. Voice low, clear, with a faint rasp at the end, like someone long accustomed to speaking to crowds. She nodded, still debating whether to ask if he had the wrong table or just turn around and leave. But his gaze kept her there. Callum Reed. He introduced himself and offered his hand, not too familiar, not imposing, but with the quiet assurance of someone unbothered by personal space. Ava shook his hand out of courtesy. His palm was warm, but he didn't hold on long. They took their seats. She still wasn't sure if this was the man her mother had arranged. There were no hints, no mention of my mother's friend or someone from church, and she had no intention of asking. The less she knew, the easier it would be to leave. Ava glanced at the menu, but her eyes didn't register a single word. "What do you do for work?" she asked, her tone carrying the guarded edge of someone refusing to be steered into a scripted conversation. "Right now, let's call it developing creative spaces," he answered, taking a sip of water. "People like to name everything a little artsy these days. So like, interior design or something." She kept her expression steady, but a slight dry curve at the corner of her lips betrayed the sarcasm. Callum tilted his head. "No, I don't paint walls or pick out sofas. I invest in places that can become somewhere people want to stay. Like this cafe, for example." Ava looked around, trying to decide if he was joking. "So real estate then?" "No. I work in lived experience." A reply that made her want to leave and stay at the same time. She wet her lips. "So you're one of those people who write apartment listings like the perfect place to begin a new chapter of your life?" "No," he said calmly. "I'm the one who decides whether to invest in that chapter or not." She paused. He was good. She had to give him that. Not the type of man trying to say something impressive. The type who chose the exact moment when saying less was enough. Callum didn't ask what she did for a living. Didn't mention why they were meeting. Didn't offer a single comment about her appearance. And that, more than anything, threw Ava off balance. How long had it been since she wasn't being read, labeled, or steered into a purposeful conversation? "So, what is this?" she finally asked, putting it on the table. "A blind date? A casual setup?" Callum looked at her for a moment before answering. "What if tonight is simply two strangers talking because they want to talk? No labels, no roles, no expectations?" Ava leaned back. "Are you always this ambiguous?" "No, only when I think the conversation is worth continuing." She laughed, not because it was funny, but because she had no idea how else to respond. "Sounds like you just got divorced and you're in the phase of rediscovering yourself." "Close enough, but I'm not here to PR anything. I just think that if I only had 1 hour left to talk to someone without needing to do anything else, I'd rather keep it real." Ava didn't respond, but she didn't stand up, and that was already an answer. They started talking about movies they watched as kids, about obscure songs no one else knew but still kept in their playlists. She told him about the time she designed a bedroom only for the client to change their mind because it messed with the feng shui, and he told her about a painter who refused to rent his space because the energy felt off. The more they talked, the more Ava noticed he wasn't trying to sell himself. He just existed there, like someone who had already weathered the storms. No need to prove, no need to chase. And strangely, not once during the entire conversation did he ask about her past. No one mentioned the word history. When the server brought their coffee, Ava took a sip and glanced at him. "Do you do this often?" she asked. "Do what?" "Meet strangers and talk like you've known them for a lifetime." Callum smiled slightly. "No, and if I did, I doubt anyone would stay this long." She didn't know why she wasn't leaving. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not probing, not evaluating, but as if he was listening even to the things she hadn't said. And that, in itself, felt strange. It had been a long time since she was treated like someone undefined. Ava couldn't pinpoint the exact moment she decided not to pull away from this meeting, but when she stepped out of the cafe with Callum, she felt lighter, as if she'd just walked out of a role she never wanted to play. The late afternoon light spilled through the rows of pines along the path, the lake in the distance reflecting a thin wash of pale gold. Neither of them spoke first. They simply walked side by side, just far enough not to brush shoulders, yet not far enough to disappear without being noticed. Callum asked if Ava wanted to go down to the beach. "I always find my way to the ocean when I can't quiet my thoughts," he said, eyes on the waves softly breaking against the shore. "The ocean reminds me I'm just a very small part of everything." Ava nodded. She wasn't the type to be swayed by poetic lines, but something in the way Callum said it, unperformed, unpolished, didn't feel like a performance. He wasn't speaking to impress, just to share. They followed the path down to the sand, Ava's sneakers sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air carried salt and a cool breeze that felt unexpectedly calming. How long had it been since she allowed herself to step outside her controlled radius like this? The last person I dated, Ava said as they neared the shoreline, was a lawyer. It wasn't framed as the beginning of a story, but Callum didn't interrupt. He always knew how to win an argument, even over things that didn't matter. At first I thought that was intelligence. Eventually, I realized it just made everyone around him feel wrong, all the time. Callum gave a faint nod. Some people use logic to hide emotion. They're not wrong. Just not safe with letting others see where they're fragile. And you? Ava asked, still watching the horizon. Do you hide anything? I used to think I could control everything, work, plans, even my emotions, until my mother divorced after 27 years of marriage, and I realized I understood nothing. He paused for a moment, then continued. She didn't blame anyone. She just said, sometimes a person only needs one small thing to turn a different way. I think about that sentence more than I want to admit. Ava turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since they'd left the cafe. You're the kind of person who speaks little but makes people think a lot, aren't you? Not intentionally. Callum smiled, his gaze softening. At some point, their conversation had slipped into something effortless. No trace of the initial guardedness. They talked about things that didn't need explanation. Wordless music, small habits only people who've lived alone would understand. The feeling of waking up in the middle of the night and realizing there's no one left to call. Ava didn't tell him everything about her past relationship, but just enough for Callum to understand it wasn't simply a breakup, but the loss of a kind of trust she once had in herself. Callum didn't share much about his work either. He only vaguely said he was in real estate, but not sales. She didn't press, because somehow that detail suddenly felt unimportant. The wind began to pick up, the sun sank lower. They paused near a row of wooden benches facing the ocean. Ava sat first, pulling up her sleeves, feeling the cool air brush against her skin. Callum didn't sit beside her. Instead, he stood a little distance away, hands in his pockets, eyes still fixed on the far-off horizon. Why do you think my mother keeps forcing me into blind dates? Ava asked, half joking, half sincere. Maybe she thinks you're waiting for something, Callum said. Something even you're not sure how to name yet. Ava stayed quiet. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel examined. Didn't feel like she had to defend herself or perform stability. For the first time, she wanted to stay, instead of silently counting down the minutes to leave. As the sun disappeared completely, Callum stepped closer. Not too close. No gesture that crossed the line, just one quiet sentence carried clearly over the sound of the waves. If we meet again, it's because we were meant to. Ava didn't respond. But as they turned to walk back up the path, she knew she would remember this moment longer than she intended. And that alone, for her, was a quietly terrifying thing. 3 days after leaving the resort, Ava still couldn't shake Callum from her mind. Not in a romantic way, but like a question suspended in her chest, uncertain whether to be pursued or left to dissolve like the hundreds of fleeting connections she'd let fade before. Except this one didn't evaporate as easily. So when she received an email from an art-focused development firm inviting her to a project kickoff meeting, she accepted immediately. Work was always the best way to regain her center, especially a community-driven project with elements of restructuring, exactly the kind of work Ava had always craved. That morning, she arrived at the downtown office building composed and focused. A simple business outfit, tablet in hand, hair neatly pinned up. Her mind was on nothing but delivering her best professionally. She was led into a glass-walled conference room where about 5 people were already seated. Ava greeted them and took her seat, pulling out her materials, ready to present her initial concept. But when the director's door opened, and a man stepped out with a coffee in hand, the entire room seemed to narrow into a single, sharp line inside her chest. Callum Reed. No casual sweater. No soft half-smile like the evening by the shore. Today he wore a white dress shirt, a light gray blazer, a square-faced watch on his wrist. Nothing ostentatious. But unmistakably, Callum stood in a position Ava had never even considered. The project lead introduced him as the founding CEO of Reed Creative Ventures, an investment and development firm focused on sustainable, creativity-driven spaces, funding and rebuilding community environments for independent artists. Ava sat perfectly still, praying no one would notice the way her hands were tightening under the table. Callum glanced at her. No more than a second. No greeting. No hint of recognition, no sign that they had once walked side by side, spoken of loneliness, shared a cold wooden bench at dusk. He led the meeting with a level of professionalism that bordered on distant. When it came to the concept design Ava had submitted earlier, Callum paused longer, flipping through each slide. He pointed to one section and said, "This lighting approach is a little too safe. This area needs more boldness, especially if you want instant visual impact the moment someone walks in." No harshness in his tone, but enough for everyone in the room to understand exactly who was in control. Ava kept her expression steady, her voice calm. "I chose that direction to preserve the building's original structure, to honor its history. But if a bolder version is needed, I can propose an alternative." Callum nodded. "I think we need a balance, preserving heritage while bringing in new energy. You can lead that." She looked up. "Lead? We'd like you to be the lead designer for the entire interior space," he said, meeting her eyes with no readable expression. Ava barely heard the rest of the meeting. Her mind flooded, anger, confusion, and a sharp sense of having been exposed. Who had he been that night? The man who walked by the ocean with her? Or the one now at the head of the table, directing everything with effortless authority? And if he had known exactly who he was then, why didn't he say it? She had spoken too openly, shown too much, while he had held everything back. When the meeting ended, Callum walked out first, saying nothing to her. Ava stayed behind to gather her materials, heart pounding but expression composed. She wasn't sure what bothered her more, that he had hidden who he was, or that he was now acting as if nothing had happened at all. She stepped out of the building without fully knowing what she felt. But one thing was certain. Whatever this was, it would not disappear like any ordinary encounter. And she was no longer someone who could walk away as if nothing had touched her. For the next 6 weeks, Ava kept a precise, unbreachable distance. She arrived on time, stayed late, and delivered every draft with near-clinical accuracy. In emails, she addressed him as Mr. Reed. In meetings, she didn't look at him unless absolutely necessary. Every exchange between them stayed strictly within the bounds of the project: design, drawings, budget, construction timeline. Not one step beyond. Callum never crossed the boundaries she had built. He remained calm, polite, almost distant. But Ava noticed, he always found ways to be just a little closer than necessary. Once, he asked to see her original draft because he wanted to understand her layout logic. Another time, he suggested they review the lobby lighting together because he preferred direct discussion over email. She knew he could have easily let his assistant handle all of it. She knew he had his reasons for not letting go. And that, more than anger, unsettled her. On a Wednesday night, they stayed late to test the lighting system for the exhibition space. The technical team had finished installing the ceiling and track lights, but needed to test them under actual nighttime conditions. Ava and Callum sat on a long wooden platform facing the main hall, watching how the shadows and contrast played over the raw concrete walls. Around 8 o'clock, the lights suddenly cut out. The entire space dropped into absolute darkness. A muted curse echoed from somewhere in the distance. The tech team clearly hit a power issue. Ava reached for her phone to turn on the flashlight, but Callum raised a hand to stop her. "Wait, we might as well use this chance to see what the space feels like in complete darkness." She exhaled and sat back down. "You really can turn every situation into work, can't you?" "Not always," he said. "Only when I don't know how to sit with silence." In the dark, his voice sounded closer. She couldn't tell how far he was sitting, but his presence felt unmistakably near, as if the air between them had thickened. "You should have told me from the start," Ava said. "You knew exactly who you were. I didn't. And I told you things I would never say on a first meeting." "And I listened," Callum replied quietly. "No interruptions, no judgment. Do you know the last time someone spoke to me that honestly?" She stayed silent. He went on. "That night, I just wanted an evening without labels. No CEO, no titles, no assumptions. For the first time, I felt like I was allowed to say nothing and still be allowed to stay." "You don't think I had the right to know?" Ava's voice was soft but firm. "I thought if I told you, you'd process everything like someone who's been hurt by power before, and I didn't want you to feel afraid of me." No one spoke for a while. Only the sound of wind slipping past the glass and distant footsteps as someone checked the power. The darkness felt less threatening now, simply present, because neither of them tried to deny it. Ava turned slightly, trying to visualize his face in the dark. "Do you do this often?" she asked. Stay hidden and wait for people to react? No, just this time. Why? Because I didn't want you to like me for what I have. I wanted to know if someone could still see me when I was nothing. Ava felt her heartbeat slow, as if something inside her was unclenching, loosening the defenses she had fought to keep. She heard him shift closer. The distance between them was no longer a meter like in the office. Maybe just inches now. Maybe I did see you, she whispered, but I don't know if I can trust that it was real. He didn't touch her, but Ava could clearly feel the warmth of his breath and the faint scent of pine from his coat. I want to kiss you right now, Callum said, but I won't, unless you want it too. Ava turned her face away, not because she was afraid of him, but because she was afraid of how much she wanted it, more than she had expected. And like every other time before, it was that feeling that made her want to run. Don't, she said softly, but steady. I'm not ready. He nodded, even though she couldn't see it, and they stayed there, in the darkness, neither moving closer, but neither leaving. After coming so close to crossing the boundary with Callum, Ava realized she was no longer in control of her emotions, and that terrified her. She had once been hurt by a relationship where power, intimacy, and work overlapped. Now, with her feelings for Callum growing too strong to ignore, she chose to pull back before everything slipped beyond the safety range. Leaving the project was her way of protecting herself from emotions she believed were wrong timing, wrong circumstance. She sent the email close to midnight. Short, polite, not a word out of place. She informed him she would be stepping down as lead designer due to overwhelming workload from other commitments, ready to hand over all materials and support the transition if needed. She reread it exactly 3 times before sending. Didn't change a thing, because she knew if she started editing, she might find a reason to stay. The next morning, Callum didn't respond by email. He simply had his assistant acknowledge receipt and confirm that the handover would be forwarded to the team. No questions, no attempt to keep her, no request to talk, as if he fully, absolutely respected her choice. Inside was a small box, no ribbon, no card. Plain, unvarnished wood. Ava lifted the lid. Inside was a miniature, a 3D printed model of the central exhibition hall. Exact to scale. Down to every wall, every walkway, but not the nearly finalized version. It was her version, the one from the night she couldn't sleep, when the design still came from wonder, not caution. At the bottom corner of the box, a single line was engraved. Quiet, unadorned. Sometimes the unplanned is exactly what we need. Ava didn't remember when she started crying. The tears weren't loud, weren't dramatic. Just something that had been forbidden for far too long, finally slipping past the guard. She sat down. For the first time in years, she didn't try to keep her expression composed, didn't remind herself to stay strong, didn't automatically shut off the feeling as a survival reflex. She cried, truly cried. And it didn't feel weak. It felt like finally loosening a wire that had been wrapped around her chest for far too long. That evening, Ava left the office earlier than usual. She walked along the coastal road where the air was cold and damp, but not unpleasant. The yellow streetlights reflected on the water, making each wave shimmer like molten metal. She walked slowly, not toward a goal, not thinking about right or wrong. Her phone vibrated. Her mother was calling. Lorraine's familiar voice came through. You've been strangely quiet these past few days. Don't tell me you've been so busy you forgot your mother exists. Ava leaned against the railing, eyes on the dark ocean. No, I've just been rethinking some things. Lorraine paused, as if trying to detect a scent. You sound different these past few weeks. I'm not saying happier, but lighter. You met someone, didn't you? The question made Ava let out an involuntary laugh, something both bittersweet and soft. Lorraine had no idea the man she accidentally pushed her daughter into meeting wasn't the typical stable and gentle guy she fantasized about. She didn't know he was a CEO, didn't know he was someone who could redirect a multi-million-dollar project with a single decision. Her mother didn't know, and the thing that made Ava pause was that she didn't truly know either. She only knew Callum was a CEO because someone else had said so. Beyond that, she never asked. Never asked what he did before this. Never asked where he started. Never asked the size of his company, his assets, anything that could have placed him. She avoided all of it. Because if she knew, she wouldn't have been able to trust her initial unfiltered instinct anymore. A simple truth she only saw clearly now. It wasn't Callum who hid. It was her who never dared to ask. Ava didn't say that to her mother. She simply said, I'm still looking for an answer. Lorraine replied, "Don't look with your mind. Look by noticing where you feel most at peace." The call ended. Ava stayed where she was a moment longer, not trying to draw a conclusion. But for the first time, she allowed herself to sit inside the uncertainty without immediately trying to escape it. The next morning after speaking with her mother, Ava woke with a strange feeling. Not heavy anymore, but not yet light. She glanced at the 3D printed model on her desk. There was no panic this time, only a sharp, undeniable pull. She couldn't tell if she was missing a person, a project, or a version of herself she had abandoned halfway. Near noon, she picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and stopped at the name Callum Reed. She hesitated for a long moment, then pressed call. He answered after 3 rings. His voice calm, neither hurried nor distant. "I think I reacted the wrong way," Ava said plainly. "And if it's not too late, I want to return, to finish what was left unfinished." "The project or something else?" Callum asked, not mocking, simply wanting the boundary clear. "Work," she answered, though she knew it wasn't only that. "And the way we ended things before. I don't want to repeat that pattern of going silent and walking away." Callum was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "There's a full review with the architecture team tomorrow. 9 a.m. Can you be there?" "I'll be there," Ava replied, and for the first time in weeks, those words didn't come with anxiety attached. When she walked back into Reed Creative's office, she noticed a shift in the team's eyes. Not curious, not speculative, more like they were watching something return to where it naturally belonged. Callum was exactly the same, not a flicker out of place. He didn't ask why she came back, didn't test her mood. During the technical review, he let her lead the entire session, only stepping in when absolutely necessary. There were no unspoken looks, no private side comments, no trace of anything unprofessional between them. And somehow, that was exactly what made Ava believe he respected her decision more than anyone she'd ever worked with. 2 days later, she asked to speak to him after the meeting. Not over email, not through his assistant. They met on the office rooftop, where there was a small garden overlooking the city. The sunset softened everything through the glass. Ava was the first to speak. "I need to know why you didn't push forward that night, after I said no." "Because I knew you were fighting something bigger than me," Callum answered without hesitation. "And if I hadn't called back, I still would have continued, not as someone pursuing you, but as someone who had witnessed something rare, and knew he had no right to ruin it." Ava was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at him. "Have you ever been married?" Callum wasn't surprised by the question. "Yes, for a year, then divorced." "Why?" "Because I thought I could love someone without changing the way I lived. I stayed buried in work, kept my distance. Believed that as long as I didn't betray her, I wasn't doing anything wrong. But I learned, not showing up is a kind of betrayal too." Ava felt her chest tighten. Not from pain, but from recognition. From realizing she wasn't the only one who had broken something good while believing she was protecting it. The project wrapped on a Friday afternoon. No big celebration, just a quiet opening with the investors, city representatives, and the participating artists. No lengthy speeches. But as Ava guided everyone through the main exhibition space, the one that began as her first sketch, now alive with light, texture, and depth exactly as she'd envisioned, she felt something inside her finally settle. Callum stood beside her in the final moment of the walkthrough. He didn't speak. He simply extended his hand, letting her decide whether to take it. Ava placed her hand in his. She didn't look around, didn't worry who might see. They stood like that, among the crowd, the concrete walls, the gallery lights, the echo of voices. But no one said anything about what came next. No one asked, "What are we?" No one demanded an answer. Just a hand held, firm enough to stay, gentle enough not to trap. And for the first time, that was enough for Ava. 2 weeks after the opening, Ava found an envelope on her desk, no sender written, placed neatly among her mail. Inside was an invitation to the opening of Reed Creative Ventures' new branch, in a city almost 1,000 miles away, along with a handwritten note. Not just work. "I want you with me." No signature, no trace of urgency. But every word sent her heartbeat off rhythm. Ava couldn't focus on anything that day. She looked at the unfinished design on her screen, then at the wooden 3D model still sitting on her shelf, and felt something old inside her being stirred awake. A part she thought had long gone quiet after years of doing all the right things. That evening, she called her mother. "I need to tell you something," Ava began when Lorraine picked up, her mother's voice as bright and energetic as always. "You're okay, right?" Lorraine asked immediately, then, after a few seconds of silence, added, "Don't tell me you quit another project again." "No, not this time. I just want to tell you something I've been hiding from you." Ava told her everything. From the first blind date, the night by the beach, Callum's identity, the silence, the closeness, the retreat, and why she chose to return. Every detail was carefully chosen. But this time, not to hide anything, but to let it be seen. She no longer wanted her mother to know only the stable version of her. Lorraine was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Ava thought she might be disappointed, until her mother finally spoke. "You know, I never cared how much money he has. I only ever cared whether your voice changes when you say someone's name. Today I heard it. That's enough." Ava smiled softly. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to ask permission to follow what she felt. She arrived at the station right on the time written in the invitation. Callum was there, no phone in hand, not looking around, simply present, exactly where he was meant to be. When he saw her, he didn't rush forward, didn't speak immediately. He quietly opened the bag beside him and pulled out 2 train tickets. Not a plane, not a car, a train, unhurried, intentional, still within reach. "You don't have to decide anything today," Callum said. "I just want to know, have you forgiven yourself yet?" It wasn't a question about the past, not about mistakes or missed chances. It was a mirror, gently asking about the one thing she had avoided facing all this time. Ava looked at the ticket in her hand, then at him. She didn't ask where it was going, didn't ask for the schedule. She didn't need to know the destination, only that this time, she wasn't taking the step alone. They stood together on the platform. Station announcements echoing in the distance, people rushing past without noticing the 2 who remained still. One who had once walked away, one who had waited. No promises spoken, no long-term plans declared. Just a quiet moment where you finally understand. Sometimes what matters most isn't where you're going, but who is walking there with you. And as the train began to pull into the station, Ava took Callum's hand. She didn't say a word, she simply stepped on. Together. Sometimes we're not afraid of loving again. We're just afraid of repeating the same mistakes. But if we keep choosing safety, will we lose the things waiting on the other side of fear? Ava doesn't know where that train will take her and Callum, but she knows that this time she isn't running, isn't setting conditions, isn't trying to control everything just to feel certain. Because some things can only be held when you finally release what's behind you. And what about you? Have you ever lost someone simply because you hadn't yet forgiven yourself? If this story has touched something in you, leave a comment and share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Thank you for listening today. I'll see you soon.